Hey everyone, welcome back to another subject build devlog. It's been a busy week on the engine and the game. We got a brand new editor, new gameplay mechanic, buff system, and a stack of bug fixes, including one that's been quietly annoying us for a while. Let's get into it. The biggest addition this week is the world editor. Up until now, we had a developer window for poking at entities and objects while the game is running, but there was no dedicated way to actually build out a level from scratch. Now hitting F8 drops you into a full world editor with its own panels. The world settings for things like the map site and the scene flags. This is the same thing coming from the developer Windows game settings. An object browser for selecting and editing anything you already placed, a placement panel for staging and spawning new objects, including right at the player's position, and a texture palette that shows every loaded model and texture as a thumbnail you can click and apply. Overall, adding the developer Windows context into the world editor. Worlds now save and load independently through their own world.json, so you can iterate on a layout without touching the actual game slave. This is the tool that's going to let us, and eventually you, if we get to that route, actually build out subjects fail space instead of scripting them by hand. One consistent issue I came across was identifying pointers and references when using InputActions texts to read their data. Now, the second big change that happened was the artifact. This is the first real piece of the game's central gameplay loop. You can now pick up an artifact in the world. It's got its own slow auto rotation, so it actually reads as a special item, and using it drops you straight into a minigame. The artifact is just a Rubik's Cube at the moment. I didn't want to put symbols on it, but I gotta learn Blender. The artifact works by selecting the currently selected minigame shown on it. Otherwise, it will start the minigame selected by the interacted object. Under the hood, this meant building out a proper action-based input system. So instead of checking, is this specific key held down all over the code base? Now we define actions like interact, jump, or artifact and interact at least once, and every system just asks, was this action pressed? So that way, the gamepad doesn't even matter. That's going to make adding new interactions a lot faster going forward. The input system allows the keyboard and gamepad control to combine into those input actions. The struct contains a name, ID, key, and the gamepad controls for that. And whenever you get a specific action type that you want to call it on, whether it's a down, a pressed, or the release action, it's gonna automatically call back that specific action. We also centered the artifact center of mass. It was visibly off balance before, so if you saw it looking like a drunk in the earlier footage, that's fixed now. While I was creating it in Blender, I used a YouTube tutorial to help create it, and then what I forgot to do was set the center of mass for the object inside of the middle of the model. The third big change was that enemies can now be buffed. Right now, there's only a speed buff that doubles movement speed for duration, tracked with the proper cooldown timer per entity. This is the foundation for status effects tied to the artifact and minigame rewards down the line. Buffs are held down by a cooldown timer vector that is stored inside the entity. This is where it lists all of the timers or buffs that will be used on the character. Then specifically inside of the update function is where we update those buffs or other parameters throughout the game. Here's the part I want to highlight. While wiring that up, we found and fixed a bug where the speed buff was silently being applied twice through two different code paths. So instead of a clean 2x speed boost, you sometimes get a 4x without anything telling you why. That's fixed now, along with a much bigger one. The settings is sort of a mix between the input system and the save system. It uses game settings to actually create the settings menus and alter the data, similar to the input actions. But whenever you save and load the settings itself, just like the save system, it will manually create those save files and load and save your data at that time. Our settings system had a bug where saving your settings produced invalid JSON, which meant the game was silently throwing out your settings and reloading defaults every single time you launched it. That one's fixed now too, so your HUD and options preferences will actually stick between sections. We also cleaned up a handful of things you never noticed directly, but that were making our lives harder. Linux builds are silently broken by file name casing mismatches, and the asset manager now scans resource folders automatically instead of needing every texture and model hand registered one at a time, which honestly should have sped up content work weeks ago. The asset manager now checks each folder inside the root resources path for any type of files. These files go through either a regular directory iterator or a recursive directory iterator. Recursive just means it checks every subfolder, and then directory iterator just checks every file inside of that specific folder. And then for each file it finds, it checks if it is a model file based off the extension, or if it's a texture file based same way based off of the extension. That way we do create a new asset, we set the name, the path, and the type, and then we also check if it's already created because we don't need any duplicate assets around. So with all that, we fill up the asset model data, we fill up the texture model data, load both assets, and then return the asset inside the assets vector. A few smaller things worth mentioning is the first, Flappy Bird. I decreased the score goal because going from 5 to 3 makes it a lot quicker. And then I had to change the movement from resetting to actually inversing. So that way it doesn't reset your velocity and then has to build a speed again. The second thing was the developer inspectors, specifically the object inspector, that now it actually shows the direction, the type, and the artifact mode. The next thing I did was the spatial audio. Originally, I mentioned this before in the last video, but I had swapped the left and right ears so that way it's fixed and directional sound carries from the right point. And finally, the game now has auto-saving whenever you close it, because I made the mistake of not backing up the world whenever I created it, and then I had to recreate everything since I did not have that backup. And that's all for the week. A new world editor, the first real gameplay mechanic in the artifact, above system, and the settings that's been fixed for good. Subject veil is still early, so if you want to follow along as it comes together, subscribe and drop a comment with what you want to see the artifact do next. We're actively designing on the mini games it plugs into. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Peace.